For me, like many people, it was the release of ChatGPT-3 in 2022.
Brad Carson is president of Americans for Responsible Innovation, a Rhodes Scholar, former U.S. Congressman, and Bronze Star recipient. He's led at the Pentagon and served as president of the University of Tulsa, bringing decades of experience in national security.
You and I both know one of the biggest challenges for small and medium-sized businesses is education. Like I'm out talking like you are to so many CEOs and founders, and I would tell you there's probably 5% of business leaders that really understand what the technology is, what it can be used for. You know, I know there's a big generative AI craze, but there's so much more to that.
There's a kid at Stanford right now who's 20 years old thinking about how he's going to use AI to disrupt what he perceives as a very fusty, old-fashioned industry.
100%.
And he probably has a great idea to do that.
Right.
And maybe the first time you hear of him is when he has a competitor to you, but then it's probably too late.
I've spent 2 decades guiding CEOs and founders to scale and reimagine what's possible. Now, the biggest shift of our lifetime is here, AI. I'm Seema Alexander, founder of Disruptive AI, co-chair of DC Startup and Tech Week, and the host of the AI CEO podcast. If you're ready to learn how AI is transforming industries, creating new growth, and rewriting the rules of business, this is the podcast for you. Because the truth is, the leaders who adapt now won't just survive, they'll define the future. Let's tap in. Welcome to today's episode of the AI CEO podcast. I am thrilled to share who we have today as a guest. Former Congressman of Oklahoma, former president of the University of Tulsa, longtime public servant working in our defense area for the U.S. Army, and now the president of Americans for Responsible Innovation, Brad Carson. Welcome to the podcast.
Seema, great to be here with you.
Oh, I'm so excited. So this one is a very special podcast episode for me because we're going to be discussing many things, but specifically the AI action plan that our president released not too long ago. And I love that your team reached out to us because this is something that's going to impact all businesses, small, medium, enterprise. And there's a lot of questions, some controversy, and I think I'd love to touch on, your perspective because you come from not only government and innovation, but education, and you've been on sort of the forefront of a lot of these systematic changes, societal changes in your career. So let's start there, okay? Could you kind of share with our audience, from sort of your vantage point, when did AI's first shift start for you when you knew that this technology was going to be the biggest turning point in society?
I think for me, like many people, it was the release of ChatGPT-3 in 2022. I'd followed AI for a long time. When I was in the Army was becoming very interested in autonomous weapons, the law around how to deal with autonomous weapons. And so I knew the AI community a bit from that work. A lot of people who worked in the Army were going to Geneva to negotiate with the Red Cross about possible treaties or international agreements on the proper use. But it wasn't really until ChatGPT-3 came that I realized that this is going to really take off. And it became obviously a mania across broader society. And I myself decided that I wanted to be involved in helping shape public policy around AI going forward.
Yeah. So, you have an incredible background in so many different areas. And so what was your perspective on was America going to be one of the frontier societies that is going to lead this change, and what were the gaps to help us get there?
Well, I think it's important America is the leader in this space, and fortunately we do have the best labs at producing the frontier models today. But that is a precarious situation, of course. China has incredible infrastructure, mighty ambitions as well, and so we can't take it for granted that we'll stay in the lead. But I've been following them for a long time. We have brilliant engineers. We have a culture that welcomes people from across the globe who are technically minded, so we have really a place where all of the best minds want to come to historically. We have a lot of capital in the venture capital world to help fund these kind of programs. And so I think we are the leaders, and it's important we stay there. And so it's been fascinating to watch OpenAI, now Anthropic, Google DeepMind, as they have breakthrough after breakthrough. So I'm hoping we can maintain our lead. And I think the AI action plan is one effort from this president to try to ensure that the U.S. keeps that leader position.
So let's talk about the AI action plan then. If I was a CEO today, And maybe we split it. Like there's a difference, I think, or maybe there isn't, an enterprise sort of CEO and then a small and medium-sized business. What are the three most important things that I need to understand in this AI action plan that is going to affect me immediately and then potentially long-term?
Well, I think the AI action plan starts by discussing a proposal to have small and medium-sized businesses reach out to the government and tell them what red tape they see, what obstacles they encounter in adopting AI for their businesses. And so they have the ability to help shape how government's going to respond to small and medium-sized businesses. At the same time, I think the AI action plan does show you that President Trump wants to diffuse AI to small and medium-sized businesses. And this is an incredible opportunity for those kind of companies because, large enterprise software, Oracle, SAP, right? They're often too expensive for kind of a mom and pop or even a small manufacturing company. But AI now is going to be much less expensive, much more freely available. The implementation of AI is not as cumbersome or as kind of intimidating as a big ERP system might be. And so it's really an amazing opportunity. And small and medium businesses should take great heart that the government's going to try to bring this technology to them. So I think it's a big part of it. Mm-hmm. I think the other part is to recognize that this is going to be a massive change in our society, and they have to learn to grapple with AI. If you're not thinking about AI today, you'll probably be consumed by an AI competitor. And so I think businesses need to be thinking through, what their moat is, and AI can leap that moat. And so are they going to try to double down on kind of a bespoke, very human touch? And some businesses will succeed in doing that. Or are they going to kind of like, hey, we're going to go big into AI and try to compete in that space? So there's a lot of strategic challenges, I think, for businesses. Mm-hmm. But I think the exciting thing is that the government wants to make sure that AI is pervasive in our society. And that means getting down to what's really the heart of our economy, which are not the big businesses, but kind of the small and medium-sized businesses.
Absolutely. So, Brad, I think you and I both know one of the biggest challenges for small and medium-sized businesses is education. Like I'm out talking like you are to so many CEOs and founders, and I would tell you there's probably 5% of business leaders that really understand what the technology is, what it can be used for, I know there's a big generative AI craze, but there's so much more to that. So is it the government's responsibility to educate? What's the plan there? Or is it the individual CEO founder's responsibility to start to educate? What are your thoughts there?
I think we all have a responsibility. If America is going to be competitive in the 21st century, it is important for the government to help promote that. And AI is going to be essential to American economic prosperity. So yes, the government has a key role, and not only the federal government, but state and local governments. Trying to educate people there about how AI could be used for education, how it could be used for economic activity, how new businesses can form around it, how you can plug into this AI revolution. So very important there. But of course, it's incumbent upon leaders and businesses to realize that this is a hugely disruptive technology. And if they don't pay attention to it, they will be destroyed by it.
Yeah. So I think one of the things is sort of like human behavior and probably the problem at hand. Until you feel the effects of something, it's kind of like life insurance, right? Like, unfortunately, my dad passed young, and until I felt that, and received something back from an insurance policy, I was like, I didn't know the importance of it. And so when you're thinking about AI, and it's like theoretically, we talk about it, you're right? Like the government's talking about it. Obama just came out and talked about it. Everybody has different influences of who they trust, right, in society. But until they start to see like how it's going to impact my business, a lot of these founders and CEOs are operators, right? They're just working on their business. They're in it, right? So what is that like? What's the way? From everything that you've been exposed to, obviously you also have an education background. Like, how do we get them to say, you got to spend time here, and this is the right? Because the other second question I get is like, how do we get educated, right? And that's, for me, I'm always like, okay, the pod, the this, the that, anything and everything I can do. That's not everything, right? So what do you tell people, in terms of this is like, you have to, but this is how you get educated.
I think people have to realize that AI is going to be like electricity, but probably more. A transformative technology that if you don't choose to electrify around 1900, you will be outcompeted by a company that chooses to do that. And to just adopt the technology is not enough. The history of electricity is very interesting, where by the 1880s, electricity was freely available to businesses, but they just tried to graft it on to businesses that had been using steam power or water wheels and things like this. It was only when they reconfigured the factory to take advantage of electricity that real growth occurred and new businesses emerged that outcompeted kind of the old guard. Well, AI is going to be very similar to that. I think it's important for people to recognize that this technology is not one you just graft on to existing businesses and processes. You need to rethink like how you're doing business, who's doing work, the corporate structure, the hierarchy that you're operating under. All of these things are in question, and you can't just add it to kind of existing processes. And I think, take life insurance as an example. There's a kid at Stanford right now who's 20 years old thinking about how he's going to use AI to disrupt what he perceives as a very fusty, old-fashioned industry.
100%.
And he probably has a great idea to do that.
Right.
And maybe the first time you hear of him is when he has a competitor to you, but then it's probably too late. And you just need to realize that there's a lot of people out there. There's trillions of dollars flowing into this space globally, hundreds of billions of dollars each year on building data centers. We're going to have this excess of computational power that this is going to be an extraordinary moment. And if you think you can have your head in the sand, right, you'll just get, have it cut off in the end, probably. So I think that's what people need to realize is one must be smart. And, most CEOs I know, they closely follow macro trends in the economy, what's happening at the Federal Reserve, what's happening, in the relationship with China, tariff policy. Well, they need to follow AI with the same level of kind of avidity because AI is going to really change the way they do their work.
Yeah. I mean, you and I, right before we started talking on the podcast, talked about, generative AI is a big sort of call it the big splash, right? Like being able to prompt something to create an image, being able to prompt something to create content, right? The large language models started the whole trend with OpenAI and ChatGPT. People call ChatGPT their bestie now, right? Like they couldn't live without it, right? And that, to me, it's become the bounty of the industry. Like, I don't know if you use Bounty?
Yes, of
okay. I'm like,
the Kleenex
it's
of the
the Kleenex
industry, right?
of the industry, exactly.
The Coke, yes.
I'm like, I was looking at your face, I was like, maybe it's not resonating. But the point is, like, people stop there. And even with a large language model and using it for content and using it to put in information about different, say, your proposals or whatever, and being able to generate those things, that is a huge win for any business, because it what I say at the first level of what needs to happen is intelligence within your business, right? Every business, say in the next 5-10 years, should have a baseline of intelligence. And we know, coming from emerging tech, a lot of these companies are starting off native like that. So there's going to be a lot of competition very quickly. So just if you could maybe, from your layman perspective, how do you describe some of the skills outside of generative AI that the business leaders need to understand about, like, there's more to this story? Don't stop there.
Well, I think they have to have a lot of critical thinking skills, because AI is not the right solution to every problem. And AI itself has some problems with it. Historic discrimination, what data sets it's been trained on. There are legal issues involved with the use of AI, and both in its implementation and what it's trained upon. There's a lot of kind of sticky, philosophical, legal, political questions around AI that a CEO, whose job is really to bear risk. When I was leading companies, when I was the CEO of a university, people would ask me, like, what's your job? I said, well, you can think of my job as being the risk bearer, right? I make decisions and I bear the risk for those. I'm not often the subject matter expert on any issue in my business or my university. Other people knew more about this particular domain. But when there was a tough call, I bore the risk, and that's what the CEO is paid to do. So when you think of the risks that AI brings too, right, you have to be keenly aware of those where you can make the smart decision, right? Should I use AI for this? Take an example at a university where I was. AI has a great use in trying to predict students who might drop out. And you can run a machine algorithm. It's not generative AI. It's another type of AI, kind of predictive AI, and look at all of these kind of things from your socioeconomic status, maybe your high school performance, the rigor of the degree you're pursuing, how many times you go in and out of your room. Those can be measured now with your key cards, how often you're accessing the library, because you again, use a fob to access the library. And you can create an algorithm that has a score for you and your likelihood to stick around and get your degree or not. But it also has questions about privacy. Should I be monitoring this student's use of the library, or how often they're going in and out of their room? We do know those things are correlated with student success, but it's not just an obvious answer that you use that kind of data. So I think that's a question you have if you're a CEO. I have a lot of data. Even if I can assimilate it into some kind of AI usable form, which isn't easy for legacy systems.
Right.
The issue is like, do I use this data? What are the limits to using this data or not? So I think CEOs need to be aware of that too.
I love that. So I think you and I both are in agreement that the moat for a lot of companies is going to be their unique intelligence. That's the way I coin data going forward.
Yes, I agree.
And so for me, when I think about that, you brought up a great example of all the data points universities have, times 10 of what you're saying, but for this particular example. Now, how do you do it in a responsible way that's creating predictable outcomes to help you add more value to the student body in this particular example, right? And that's how I want the CEOs and founders to start to think about a lot of the data that they have today. I talk a lot about this on every pod, but the two words I always say is personalization and precision. Right? Because the more data that you have, the more unique experiences you'll be able to provide your customers, whoever that may be, right? And so, and I also think the data for in terms of future business model, if you're doing it right, if you've got the legal sort of guarantees around privacy and you're collecting the data the right ways, that will become a licensable opportunity for you, for other companies to leverage your data. I have one question around that. I mean, obviously all the large language models have been trained on billions of inferences, and they're running out of data to be trained on. So I have a theory that all these companies that can curate all the new data are going to have a big competitive edge. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think you're right. Data is like the oil of the AI economy. You're trained on trillions of tokens, these models are. They've basically read everything ever written on the internet and brought it into kind of some database, if you will, that they can refer to. But we are running out of well-curated data, right? And so that's a challenge. And you saw this week, for example, Anthropic, which makes Claude one of the leading models, said we're changing our terms of service, where now they gave you rightly the ability to opt out of this, but they're going to say, we're going to train on your work that you're putting into it. So if I'm uploading data myself, maybe to review documents or something like that, so we're going to train on that because that's a great source of information.
For sure.
It's also why a lot of people think Google in the end has a great edge in AI, because think of all the data that Google has access to, all of your Gmail, right? It reads all of those kind of things and can bring that into training. All the Google Docs data that's out there, the Google Sheets data, right? So they have a massive data edge where OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, if you will, they're all having to acquire data, right? Controversially acquire it in some cases. While Google has access to a lot of proprietary data through their own other services, it gives them an edge. And so I think you're right. If you're a company with great data, that's an incredible resource. It's highly monetizable for yourself and for others. And for language models going forward, data is going to be a big question. They increasingly are generating their own synthetic data right through the models. And they can still transcribe YouTube videos. There's a lot of data out there that's not in a usable form so much today. But yes, if you're a company with data, you need to realize it can be hugely beneficial to you, and you can sell it to others too.
Yeah, so two things, you said a lot in there, but that I'd love to chat about. But transparency in terms of how you're using the data, I think, is probably one of the biggest lessons I've heard from other companies, is that, yes, Google has all that information, but if they're not sharing that they're using that information to make things more personal, that's when lawsuits can occur, right? And so there's that need of getting your legal folks involved or sharing and having those open communications with your customers, and that let them opt in,
Exactly. I mean, data governance is not a very sexy topic to people, but it's an absolutely essential one if you're a leader of a business today.
It is.
What's the privacy implications of this? What are the other legal rules? There are anti-bias laws in most jurisdictions, and you might run afoul of them if you're not careful. If you're using models that you just buy off the shelf and you try to use it for some kind of predictive work, right? It may be trained on data that doesn't actually match your situation.
Right.
It could give you misleading outcomes, and people could then like say, hey, you know, it was discriminatory in some way, and you're liable for that. So yes, this data governance question is a really important one for CEOs to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I had a previous podcast, I had the CEO of Trustable here that's focused all on governance. They're doing an incredible job. They were, I wouldn't say a spinoff, but they left Fiscal Note and they started this company. And I said, okay, Gerald, our goal is to make data sexy for this podcast, right? Because it is a important topic. It's the first technology that you can use structured and unstructured data to create real business insights. It's like, I remember like when I used to work at Prudential years and years and years ago, like, you know, corporate environments used to struggle with unstructured data. It was so expensive. And now you can literally take a picture of something and it can grasp that information, and then, you know, you can tag and do all the things. It's never been able to be done before that easily, that accessibly.
That's right. And that's a huge business opportunity for people to recognize that the barriers to like success, right, have been dramatically eliminated.
Yeah.
They're lowered. And so I think, you know, that's an incredible opportunity for people in that respect.
So you mentioned the word syndicated data. Do you mind explaining what that is and how businesses can either create their own synthetic data, or, you know, borrow it or license it from others like NVIDIA and others?
Sure. So if you're OpenAI, Anthropic, Google DeepMind, right, you've trained on everything the internet has ever written. And so you've kind of exhausted that a bit. Again, there's still more out there. You can find new data is being created all the time. You can transcribe YouTube videos and these kinds of things. But the new models are using a lot of synthetic data, which is to say they're asking the models themselves to create new data, answers to questions, which are then evaluated for being right or wrong. Are they in the form that's most helpful to people? And so it's generating new data that they can train themselves on. And they mix it in a very clever way, right, with existing data to ensure that problems don't ensue. But the idea that you can make the models can generate their own data, right? They are large language models. And so if you want reports to train on, well, the LLM can generate a report in the same way that I might write a paper and put onto the internet. It was then trained on that paper, right? It can generate its own report, its own authorship, and then train on that. So that's synthetic data. Mm-hmm. And so that's going to be, well, it's already in extensive use in the training of these models, and probably over time will only get more so.
Oh yeah, I cannot agree with you more. And I think it's one of those things that people don't realize that that's even out there. I always think about like Facebook ads where they're lookalike audiences, right? You don't have your own audience, but you have a demographic that you're choosing from. And so Facebook or Meta pulls that data and say, okay, there's an audience like this here. We're going to target those ads there.
Yes.
So it's a similar and different, right? Where you're getting data to help train your models that's similar to your predictive theories or assumptions, but it's trust and verify.
That's right.
Trust and verify. One of the areas I wanted to chat about was around the concept of the red tape, like in terms of cutting the red tape for speed in the AI action plan, right? I'm sure, you know, one of the sort of controversial back and forth conversations I've had a lot is this 10-year moratorium on, you know, if you're a 10-year moratorium on AI policy when it comes to the states, and maybe you can explain it much more to this audience of what does that actually mean? What happens if bad actors get involved? Because in any of this, you know, especially this type of technology, like there's a lot of opportunity for the other side, you know, the deep fakes to get even faker. I had a phishing incident recently that was so real. It was unbelievable. And I think about like, you know, the internet, like we had identity theft as a big, you know, part of kind of the outcome of what happened with the internet. And there's so much more that's possible here. So the question goes back to, we have a 10-year moratorium on some of this policy, considerations for states. What does that actually mean? What does it mean for businesses?
So let me start off by saying it's a bad idea. And we at ARI have led the fight to make sure we don't have a 10-year moratorium. What it is this. The states are taking action in the absence of federal leadership on this question. AI is now in everyone's life. They see many of the good aspects of it. It can help in many ways make your life better. You know, we talked about business efficiencies, incredible educational opportunities. It's a lot of fun to deal with. But they also see things like the AIs are contributing to suicidal ideation, where we had that story in the New York Times last week about a young man who was chatting with it almost like a friend, getting advice about how to hang himself. And it did give him that advice, and indeed encouraged him not to talk to other people about it. We see other kind of like psychopathologies developing around it. You've already mentioned how AI can do deep fakes. Already high schools and even junior highs are riddled with these problems of people making nude images of people by creating kind of like take a picture of you or your kids or something, and they can make pornographic images with it.
Yep.
There's a lot of examples like this that people see and have no love with. And so the federal government, because it's so hard to get things through Congress these days, has not shown a lot of leadership in kind of dealing with the reasonable guardrails around AI. The states are more active, California and New York, but about 35 states this year are very active in the AI space. And so there is some concern from the industry, and it's not entirely illegitimate concern about a patchwork of regulation across the country. And so there was a proposal to put a moratorium on all state regulation of AI for 10 years.
It's a very long time in AI land.
Exactly. In 10 years, who knows where it will be, right? There are many people who think we could have artificial general intelligence in
and we're going to talk about
10
AGI,
years.
100%.
And so that's the idea, is like that's a very long time.
Yes.
And to replace it with nothing,
yes,
it's basically it creates a kind of a regulatory black hole. Because it's one thing if the federal government came in and it's like, okay, we see these problems with pornography or suicidal ideation or manipulating children, and we're going to like address it. And then we're going to try to like preempt the states. But to just preempt the states with no federal action just kind of makes it the Wild West. And I think that's really one of the things we work at ARI on, is to say, we believe in the technology. We think this is going to be revolutionary, make us wealthier, healthier, better all across the board. But you do need a few kind of guardrails on it to ensure that people don't lose confidence in it, and that the worst actors don't really kind of drive out the good actors in the space.
Yeah. I mean, when you and I chatted, I mentioned a phrase that you said you want a coin, you can take it. Innovation has implications.
Exactly.
Right. And so for me, one of the last podcasts, actually, I had an event here, and I had my older daughter, who's an 11th grader, and my niece, who's also a rising 11th grader. And we were talking about like how their world is going to look in the future, or what they're worried about, all the things. And, it's I think the younger generations have just they almost came back and said, we don't even want it. Our parents are talking a lot about this stuff, but we want things to stay the same. And the things that are going to make our life easier, input it. But part of what they were saying is create custom GPTs or create custom AI that makes sense for us at different parts of our, either education cycle, and because I had mentioned, I was like, I also have a 11-year-old, and I'm like, should she even get ChatGPT? And they're like, no way, it's too early. There are no guardrails, right? And so I think there's an opportunity to learn from our past, especially with all the social media reports that have been coming out, and looking at, obviously the internet and things previously. It's like, why wouldn't the government, take a stance? I mean, I'm saying this, I have some perspective here too, but it's like, if we don't, we're going to have a lot of implications. It's just that simple. So, like, what could we do, I guess what I'm saying, as the people?
I think the people are on the right side of this issue. When you see polling of Americans, most of them are like, we think AI could be good, but we're very worried about its implications for jobs, as an example, but also kind of the social media repeat, and we know the problems, what it's done to young people in this country. And so most people are like, we want reasonable guardrails on AI. Now, it is true that as of today, not that many people vote on that particular issue. So it's low salience, but overwhelmingly, Democrats and Republicans alike say, we think this should have reasonable guardrails around it. So I think part of it is like allowing people to understand how powerful and pervasive this technology is just today, but it's only become more so in the future.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really even where we are today that's so worrisome. It's like we are on an exponential growth trajectory. And they said in 2 years, in 5 years, this technology is going to be 3 to 5x probably what it is today. And so for businesses, they need to realize that. That's why you should get in early.
Yeah.
I get it. The systems are not perfect yet. They hallucinate some, right? You're going to have technical debt if you go in early and try to like move to a new system next year. But it's going so rapidly. If you don't become AI native as a business, you're just going to lose out. And as a society, if we don't get our handle on it early, it will be like social media again, where it just becomes too ubiquitous, too entrenched in people's lives. The interest becomes so deep that Congress is like stymied and can't get their hands around it. So that's what we hope to do is Congress really needs to act. What can people do? They need to pay attention. They need to ask their congressmen, their senators, their governors, their state officials to say, take action on this. We care.
Yeah. A lot of people don't do that.
No.
A lot of people do not touch the local government. They just don't. They're like, I have so many other things to do. They'll figure it out. But here's what I say, Brad, because for me, it's like we get a lot of like, hey, I want AI in our company, but I don't want to be in the news 3 years from now, right? So it's also, to me, the business leader's responsibility to do it responsibly, like, and it's exactly what you stand for, right, in your organization, because yes, it's almost like we have to learn from our past, right? If you don't, then, you're doing yourself a disservice, because if there are people doing a lot of things, like from scraping everything to not ignoring privacy. I see it, and I'm hearing what some folks are working on, and I'm like, well, okay, like you do you, but the thing is, there are going to be implications from a lot of this stuff in the future. I think getting legal is also in different places. I've had many conversations with people that are much more progressive in the space, and then others that are very conservative. And I think it comes down to the culture of your company, right? And going back to your original point, the CEO's job is to take risks. But if your risk tolerance is at a certain space, then you have to go with your gut there. The larger companies I see doing a really great job, the ones that are doing a great job, are cross-collaborating with compliance and all, legal and product, like marketing. They're bringing everybody together, right? And then the smaller companies, honestly, they don't have the bandwidth. They don't have the expertise in house, right? Most of the smaller companies are using subscription-based models, or if there are some industry-specific AI solving a real problem, and there happened to be a vendor that walked in their door, a lot of times you don't even have to say the word AI. It's just you're solving business problems, And I think that's really what this comes down to is, yes, everyone needs to be very serious about understanding and getting educated on AI, but it's really it's two parts: solving the challenges that you already have to make your processes and your experiences less frictionless, and then how do you innovate with these things, because this is a moment in time that you can disrupt like nobody else. Nothing else.
No, that's exactly right. And even just like very small things. Like I'll give you an example. My wife has always wanted to start a small boutique. And, how do you get started with that? Well, she says, I need a website to kind of like minimally advertise what we have, right? Every business has a website, just where you can be found. I'm like, well, 3 years ago, I would have said, that's probably like a $10,000, $20,000 project. Do we really want to spend that kind of money? Are you serious about this? I don't even know who the vendors are, so I have to spend precious time interviewing people and reviewing their work. Today, with AI, I generated something in 45 minutes for her. And am not a big coder.
Let me ask you, what tool are you using?
I'm using Cursor.
Okay,
but there's like 200 of these kind of Cursor competitors.
Cursor, Replit, Lovable. Yeah, I love them.
Exactly. Some are easier than others. Some have specialties. But I used Cursor, and within an hour, I have like a beautiful website. And again, it's mostly truly vibe coding, as they say. This is like, okay, so suddenly has a boutique, right? Something that was an obstacle to her doing this kind of work, and enough where she's like, okay, I maybe won't do it. Now you have a website and you can get it going. That's the kind of small examples that you can do at scale. You could have microsites, for your whole business, doing all kinds of different things. With your data, you can individualize these practically. And this technology is going to get better, right? In 5 years, you'll probably be able to just like enter a paragraph and a beautiful website shows up, and you don't even have to like spend an hour kind of going back and forth with it.
Yeah, we've talked about vibe coding on this podcast, but just for giving the community an understanding, there are these amazing tools out there, as mentioned, Cursor, Replit. I use Lovable a lot. You can literally prompt it with like your natural language and say, this is the type of website I'm looking for. This is some of the content, all of the things, and it can actually generate content for you. But then it pops up, and you can easily, you can make changes, you can deploy it, connect it to your GoDaddy domains, all the things. And it took you 45 minutes.
And it gives you amazing suggestions. Like, as an example, I said, I didn't really love the user face it adopted. I said, I like to be more futuristic. And I said, how about like 3 examples? And check these websites out. Do you like their methods?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, those look cool. I'm like, I'll give you an example of it. And then like, boom, like changes it, and instantly the user face would be some combination of these kind of things. And so it also like suggests things to you along the way. It's not just you telling it. It comes back and is interactive in a way that I think probably most people, unless you're really in the space, they don't realize these technologies are really quite incredible. And they're quite user-friendly, actually. 100%. You don't have to do much to get like a pretty amazing product that, again, just 3 years ago would have required hiring people with some level of education, and experience in coding, and, it would have been thousands of dollars. I mean, this is just like a small example of what every business can be doing. And you're just going to see more and more of it over the next decades.
100%. And there's so many tools out there that are, to your point, are continuously coming to the market. I think that's where a lot of the confusion also happens, right? It's like, how do we know what's real? How do we know, like, is this a tool that we should be using versus, this? And that's why I think a lot of people stick with like a ChatGPT, for example, because they feel like they can trust it already because it has become the bounty of a brand, right? And so this is, in my mind, where newer legacy systems are going to be created, right? Because it was like the Google when the search came out, right? It's like something is sticking. And now with ChatGPT, even with this new, their latest model, vibe coding, meaning you can actually prompt it to create things in code, they're going to make that easier in addition to what they already do. So that lots of tools. I think Cursor, Lovable are 2 of my favorites, but for small business and medium-sized businesses, those are great tools to be able to.
And the image generation is incredible. I mean, another example, we are redecorating our home and had an interior designer, right, who spent weeks coming back with drafts, these beautiful artistic renderings. Well, there are a few small projects that we didn't have him do. And so we just took a picture and asked ChatGPT-5 to do images. And we would give suggestions, like something in the style of like Frank Lloyd Wright. Boom, it would like transform the picture into like what you could do if you want a Frank Lloyd Wright. Or if you said, I want it to look like X or Y, or I want it to be this color or that. Yeah. And it would suddenly just generate rendering after rendering for no cost to me, right, of what the space could look like. Something that, again, took an interior decorator weeks to do and thousands of dollars. I mean, those are just kind of like fun uses, but you can see that if you're an interior designer, like, he doesn't like it now, right? Because I sent him, he's like, hey, on ChatGPT, I redesigned the room. And I said, what do you think? And he's like, of course, doesn't love that. But this is what the future is going to be, 100%. Right? People.
So there are 2 parts to that. One, I want to add to it, because you can also say, hey, ChatGPT, this is an amazing picture. Where can I buy this furniture?
Yes.
Right? So you can go even that far, and it could source it from, just the renderings to say, it's not exact, but something similar you could get at Target, or something similar you can get at X, Y, and Z. That's cool, but to your point, that interior designer is like, holy moly, like all of a sudden, ChatGPT did my job for me, and what happens to my 20 years of experience? Doesn't it matter?
No, exactly.
Doesn't it matter, Brad? Doesn't it matter? What's your, what
do you say to
that?
Because it just shows you like how AI can be used beneficially. I still send him, remember, the picture, because I want his taste.
Yeah.
Right? High taste is still something that's not commodified. It's not part of the AI world. Mm-hmm. And so I sent him a design. I'm like, what do you think? And he sent it back and he said, hey, that's kind of tacky. And he was right.
Yeah.
And so like that taste is not something I get.
Right.
But the rendering of like various ideas and the iteration of ideas is something that AI does very well. And that example you gave there about buying things, same thing. He presents a couch and I'm like, that's super expensive. I take a picture of it and I go to AI. I'm like, find me the cheap version of this. Yeah. And I find like the same couch for a much less expensive version of it, Target or wherever. I mean, those kind of things, which are more commodity oriented, right? They're going to have AI do them. And that's inevitable. If you try to hold out on that, you'll just be outcompeted in some way, right? But the taste that my interior decorator has, who says, that's the wrong color. AI will tell you actually that's the wrong color, but his taste is still more exquisite. And that is like where value is found.
Would you pay more for that value?
I would pay more for that value.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's what you go forward, think like, what jobs will be immune from AI? And I'm not talking next year, 5 years, but say in 50 years, where it's hard to believe that AI won't be just everywhere in the economy, and that many jobs will be automated in 50 years. You'll have widespread robotics. It could come far faster than that.
I think it's going to come faster than that. We'll talk timing.
But certainly in our lifetime, you think minimally in our lifetime, you're going to see this kind of thing.
Yes.
And you're like, well, what skills do humans still have? And people with high taste, whether it's in literature, poetry, film, art of any kind, art, interior design, that is like a place where the humans will still have like a domain expertise in. And so that's the way to think of these kind of problems. It's like there are certain things that can't be automated.
Yeah.
And good taste is one of them.
Yeah. So let me ask you that, because I always, I've coined this time the messy middle, because it is messy, right?
Okay.
So to that example, I was at a commercial real estate industry association meeting that I was doing a talk on why AI is bigger than the admin and internet. I curated a very industry specific panel for them. And an architect, an interior designer, mid-sized business company CEO stepped up and asked a question. And she said, look, I understand these tools are great. They're obviously compressing years of experience into them. But the problem is with the newer folks coming in from school, and this is a really good one for you, from college, they'll be like, okay, well, this is the rendering, and she's like, I can walk into a room and look at the light fixtures and be like, that's off. That's not right. This is, they don't have that experience. All of a sudden you're compressing 15 years of experience in a prompt.
No, that's right.
How do you teach the experience to say, okay, this might be good, but it's not exactly what we need, or this is not the most optimal, because they're trusting whatever this AI tool is telling them. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's one of the great challenges AI presents us. And I don't have an answer for you, because take software engineering, which has a very similar situation, right? We talked about Cursor. I don't have to, it's made me my own software engineer, even though I'm not really a coder. But there's still a role for coders with high taste, who can edit code, who can make sure it really works, who can find the occasional bugs that even those programs will do and make it better. But those people have years of experience. That's how you get high taste. And how do you get that without like going through from the beginning levels, right? And years pass and you get this kind of status. Right. Well, if you're not hiring the beginning entry-level people anymore, right, you're not grooming folks who in 15, 20 years will be high-taste editors. So I think that's one of the great challenges. Interior design, you see it in your example. Software engineering sees it. It's like, if we're not going to hire young software engineers, right, I could edit code today. Like I'm very experienced maybe. I've been doing it for 20 years. I'm an expert. So I'm a great editor of AI-generated code, and that's a huge value to my company, and you need someone like me to be the editor. But where's the future editor come from? Right? Because that training pipeline has been disassembled by AI. And I don't have an answer for you about like how that will go. I think that's a real problem our society faces, and maybe a business opportunity,
100%.
Right? For somebody to say, I have a fix for that problem.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of merit, and I'm going to do my own research on like how the previous industrial revolutions dealt with it, because it was the same. Maybe the time was not as short as AI is doing it, but this was the same problem, like, when computers and internet, all of a sudden these jobs are no longer. Actually, I was listening to a Mark Cuban interview yesterday, and he mentioned, he's like, when the internet came out, he's like, I was 24 knocking on doors of businesses and saying, hey, I want to teach you how to use internet and commerce. And he's like, CEOs would look at me and be like, hello, son. Well, I have a receptionist and I have this. We're never going to and he's like, I just kept knocking down because this is the moment in time for businesses to really understand this stuff. And that's a huge opportunity. But the perspective of business owners, it really depends on where they're at in the cycle. Do they believe in it? Do they see it? And I think people are starting to see the chasm, but they still have to understand what it means to them.
I think they have to be more visionary. It comes down to kind of the Clayton Christensen innovator's dilemma problem. IBM has a good business, right? They're doing mainframes and they lead the world in this. It's very lucrative for them.
Yeah.
So the PC, I can imagine you can just put yourself back in time for what IBM leadership was thinking. I'm sure they felt like, hey, we're wedded to this particular technology, but there were probably people who dismissed, like, oh, this is a fad, right? It'll never be that widespread. Personal computing seems like some kind of sci-fi notion. And, they were overcome by events. And so I think that's what businesses have to realize. It's like, it's easy to be like wedded to your frame But there's people challenging the frame, and there's a lot of momentum and money, and the smartest people in the world really are coming after you. And so if you think you can resist that, bully for you. But my thing is, like, you should be concerned because, like I said, as I often tell people, AI, the smartest people in the world have hundreds of billions of dollars and openly are committed to a project that they think they're making real progress on. If you think that's all bunk or hype, okay, maybe, not impossible, but I'm just telling you, they have like marshaled an incredible force, and I wouldn't take them lightly.
Yeah. But what's incredible is, yes, the smartest people in the world are working on these things, but so can you.
Yes, exactly.
Because you have the tools today.
Exactly. And that's democratizing the tools. That's what AI is about. It's like suddenly we can all code, right? The education you can get from AI, if you want to just like sit and talk to ChatGPT about whatever question you have, if you want to, as you mentioned, research the Industrial Revolution and like how did this kind of missing middle problem get dealt with then? Now, if you, before the internet, how would you go about that?
Okay.
You go to a university library. If you had access, you probably don't, but if you did, you might go there and try to like find every book on the Industrial Revolution, read them, look for footnotes and citations. I mean, it would be a really challenging task that only scholars would do, right? Now, with the internet that came along, that helps. You do some kind of Google search, you might find some articles that maybe addressed it, right? Some random person in like the Upper Peninsula who's written about it that you could access.
Yeah.
But now you can have a 5-hour conversation with ChatGPT that will walk you through like everything you ever wanted to know about it. You can ask more questions. It will prompt you with better questions still. Like perhaps you're really thinking about not the Industrial Revolution, right, but the Agricultural Revolution suffered similar problems. I can like talk to you about that. I mean, what it can do to make you smarter sitting in Oklahoma, where I'm from, right, and with no access to world experts. I mean, it's truly unbelievable.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'd love to chat infrastructure. So, I mean, look, America, it needs chips and power and data centers. That's a whole conversation around AI, right? And there's lots of controversy on the energy piece that we can chat about in a few minutes. But do we think, obviously there's investment dollars being put into the infrastructure right now. Do you believe America's ready for it? Are we leading in it? Do we have what we need around really gaining these core elements to thrive in the world of AI?
I think energy is the hardest one for us to meet. I mean, you think of like the competition with China. So we have the best chips in the world, and there's a debate whether we should sell them to China or not. But the US, through NVIDIA, AMD, we have the best computer chips in the world. The Chinese and Americans all have a lot of good data. The Chinese can outcompete us on energy, right? They're building plant after plant, adding gigawatts to the system in a way that's very hard in the US to do. And so energy, I think, is a real challenge for us.
Yeah.
I think for listeners, what's interesting about the investment is this is an extraordinary capital project building out these data centers. It's estimated that just the hyperscalers, we're talking Amazon, Google, Meta, they're going to probably put in annualized run rate of about $500 billion, $500 billion. In some ways, it's propping up now, experts are saying, the entire economy. We're spending more on data centers than consumers spend each year. And if the economy is growing at like 2.5%, they're saying about 1% of that 2.5% is from AI data centers alone.
Yeah.
And so there's concerns about a bubble, maybe overinvestment in it. But we're really building these things out in really historic fashion. It's going to be one of the great projects. They're building the pyramids or something before it's all over. Can we find the energy sources for it? I think that's actually an unresolved open question, of which when I talk about this issue a lot to people, I think we have to get our act together, because I think on the current pace, the answer is no, we're not going to have enough energy.
Right.
We're ingenious folks. There's a lot of motivation, but it's going to require that for us to get to where we need to be.
Wow, I've never heard it compared to the building of the pyramids before, the energy piece. It's interesting because I also look, because of Startup in Tech Week and other emerging tech initiatives I'm part of, the climate and sustainability people are right here, right? They're right here, as they should be. So what does that actually mean for us and our planet if we need to consume so much energy for where we're going? And this is just AI. We haven't even touched quantum, right? So are they right?
Probably not right. There's some good news for the climate from AI, and that is not from the energy side of the house in terms of the generation, because it is almost certain that if we're going to build out the energy we need in the US, some of it's going to be powered by fossil fuels, natural gas. But the Trump administration is also slow rolling the phasing out of coal plants. So there's no question that
it's a little backwards, don't you think?
Well, they need
a lot backwards.
The coal plants are certainly dubious, but they just need the energy wherever they can find it, right? They're revivifying nuclear energy again as well, something that was, being mothballed across the world and even in the U.S.
Right.
So relative to previous to AI, there's likely to be more emissions. But the International Energy Agency came out with a great report about 6 months ago that said net AI will reduce emissions because of what it can do on the conservation side. So think of like all the energy being spent on buildings and homes, right? If this is AI powered, it can manage that in a much better way to ensure that we're not squandering lots of energy use and the associated emissions upstream of that.
Because of predictive analytics, because of actual like usage, and it can be on demand type of infrastructure that can be built. It's the next wave of smart homes.
Right, that precision you talk about, right? So we now, I just turn on the heat or the power and like it comes, I don't worry about it. It's going to be much more precisely delivered to me. And the net savings of that on emissions are probably going to outweigh what data centers are producing. So that's good news. But there is no question that the data centers alone are going to kind of, certainly going to be fueled in part by natural gas, and maybe even, like I said, these residual coal plants that are not, put into storage like was planned previously. But I think, we underestimate how powerful AI can be and just rendering a lot of services that we use more precise and therefore much more efficient, and that saves a lot of energy too.
Okay, so if I'm a CEO, should I be worried if I'm really trying to innovate in that space with the semiconductors and the energy being where it is today? What are the precautions I need to be taking? How far can I take my innovations basically right now?
Well, I think on the energy front, you should be worried about it because it could put a limit to America's leadership in AI. China has incredible energy. If they get access to chips, develop their own, or we sell it to them, or they smuggle enough in, right, China could take the leadership over us. So energy is, I think, really the constraint on American leadership in AI. And if that's important to you, which it should be, I think, then I think that's a major concern for you as well. I think if you're in the business as well, you should watch closely this idea that it could be a bubble in AI data centers. And given that it's such a huge part of our economy today, if it were to collapse, this would be the financial crisis of 2008, or maybe the internet crisis of 2000, 2001, like kind of added together, right? It would be
pretty disastrous.
A disastrous moment for the economy.
Don't you think it's inevitable?
It might be.
Yeah, because the thing is that any emerging technology comes a hype cycle. Right. And there's over predictions on things. And that's just normally where a lot of investors get caught up. And like, again, being part of the ecosystem early on with AI, it was like gold rush, right? And people didn't know that some of these companies were just ChatGPT wrappers because they weren't educated enough until you start to dig deeper in terms of now you're hearing words like, we're investing in vertically integrated solutions. And so obviously, a lot of investors are very smart people, right? But I think that's the way of the world right now, where there's a lot of unknowns because we also don't know when all this energy is going to be consumed. So there might be a lot of data centers just sitting there.
That's it. And that will be used like, fiber was laying in the ground after the 2000 crash as well. And suddenly it was used, for, Web 2.0, Web 3.0, those kind of things. And so the asset's still there and could be put to great use. The initial investors obviously, lose their shirt. And it can bring down the entire economy as we're reliant on it. I mean, even the whole stock market today is driven by 7 companies. Those 7 companies at the top end of tech, right, are more profitable than like the other 493. And I think if you're a macroeconomist, that's of concern to you, right? That we're so driven by a few number of companies who've made enormous bets on the future, which seem well placed. Yeah. But if they're in error, if facts intervene, right, it will all of us. They'll get pneumonia, but we'll all get cold as well when it collapses.
So, Brad, let's talk about that because I watched Social Dilemma. Rewatched it recently. I don't know if you watched the documentary, but it was all about the bros sitting in the rooms when social media was really, taking off at Facebook at that time, and, all the different platforms. And it was, that's a business model to help us stay focused on sticking to our platforms, right? Again, innovation has implications. The doom scrolling, the constant dopamine hits, of like needing, somebody just notified me or messaged me, and that did create this like bubble of the top tech companies, especially in social. And we see it here right now, right? With OpenAI, we're seeing it, like what's happening again. So how can we, and there's two parts to this question, because I also see a lot of small companies that I believe are ripe for M&A. Like, I think there's going to be a big merger of like all these narrow generative AI solutions, and some companies are going to take them up by industry or whatever it may look like, to license or use what they've created. But how do we not do it again? Tell me how we're not going to do it again, Brad. And where does the government play a role in that?
Well, politics is the answer to that.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think kind of one of the more dystopian futures that AI could offer us is many jobs are displaced.
Yeah.
And these companies at the frontier have become gigantic, even bigger than they are today, dominate the economy. A lot of wealth accrues to them as they are automating the economy through those products.
Right.
And we need a system of taxation. I mean, I think these are like interesting questions for us that could come pretty soon, but certainly will come in our lifetimes, about even the whole social compact between people and their government, which is for centuries has been about people working. They get certain services back from the government, minimally protection from enemies. You pay a certain fraction of your income, wage income usually, to the government in exchange for that. A world where not many of us are working is questions like, what do we do for meaning? What do we do for basic sustenance? If the price signals in the economy have evaporated, like, how do you have a market economy in that situation?
What does universal basic income look like?
Yeah.
And how does that fare?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how much do I need? What is my UBI? And and you have to tax Sam Altman to get it, and Sam Altman is going to fight you on that question. And in American politics, money often wins. And so the idea of like what the political ramifications of AI are just being grappled with. It's like, what kind of world are we going to have if the ambitions of Sam Altman or Dario Amodei, Demis Hassabis, Zuckerberg are realized? It's like they tell you what they want, which is they think 95% of jobs can be automated by AI, and that can happen soon. Let's assume that's true. Like, what does the world look like? I don't think we're really prepared for that.
Yeah. But look, I go back to human adoption, though. Yes, and it would be my answer to that, because I'm in the world of making businesses intelligent, and I see it, right? But it's going to take time. I ask this question to all my guests, like, what do you think the timing? And we haven't gotten to AGI. That will be a whole other part of the conversation. But it's like, there is this thing about human behavior. There are going to be companies at the forefront. They're going to disrupt it. It's who they are. They're going to be native AI companies that have all these workflows automated. There will be billion-dollar companies with very lean teams. I see it. I know it. It's happening. I think the larger portion of SMBs, NEs, like enterprises as well, it just takes more time for that change management and organizational changes to happen. There will be major implications, like the Kodaks and the Blockbusters and all the companies that died at the vine during the internet boom, right? Because they weren't paying attention. But I do think some of these companies are paying attention. It takes just time, So I'm, because I was always I do believe in the next 18 to 36 months, every industry and workflow will be disrupted. Now, when that impacts a particular company, I don't know. When that impacts a CEO to say, we have to change today, or we're in trouble, or we are in trouble, I don't know those moments and times, because every industry is a little different right now.
I think the challenge for CEO is, and I would disagree with you slightly on this point.
Please disagree.
Kodak and Blockbuster were paying attention. They just couldn't do it, right? Kodak had all of the patents for digital photography.
That's right.
Right? Polaroid, the same kind of thing, right? They were in the cutting edge of R&D. They just could not get away from the bread and butter, right? The whole culture was set in a certain particular way, all the incentives, right? The moving from this local maximum to maybe a global maximum was very hard, right? You go through some kind of valley of death to get there.
Right.
I mean, they just couldn't, as a company, make it. They couldn't manage it. They weren't foolish. They didn't it wasn't they were blindsided. It's like, I can't do it. I think that's going to be the issue with AI. Is you get these AI native companies that are from the scratch built on AI and making it work. And I have a more analog company. I'm like, I want to go there. Well, I've got a lot of employees. I've got incentive structures. I've got cultural norms.
That's right.
It isn't easy just to say, okay, new rule, right? We're all going to go AI here.
Right.
I mean, if I were a CEO, I probably would do a Clayton Christensen thing, form a tiger team and say, you guys use AI to recreate my business. And I'm going to make you my skunk works over here and see how that works. And you're protected from the rest of us where we can't bureaucratically destroy you like often happens.
Yeah.
And see if you can recreate, my life insurance company in AI.
Yeah.
And then maybe that company gets big enough, right, that it subsumes my older economy one. I think it's a real challenge this is what you see, I think, the history of business is a lot of people yeah, I kind of get that's the future. But, the local's pretty good, and getting to the future, that transformation will be almost impossible. It will break us to do it, and therefore you can't make the move. It's just like you're frozen in kind of the existing paradigm. I think a lot of people will find that with AI, I fear, as well. So if you're a CEO, something to think about.
Yeah, rethink, reimagine, rewire is part of my conference tag for next year with AI Business Con, because you are literally changing. You have to think about how your business model is going to completely change with this new technology, because it has to.
And that requires real leadership.
It does.
I mean, it's not easy to do that kind of change management.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, because I met the CMO of Kodak 15 years ago. I was at a brand managed campus at a big conference in New York, actually California. Anyway, so he's the one who shared the whole story, and it always stuck with me. He's like, we missed the boat, but I love how you position it, because it was a culture thing. And so part of it is you can even have the education, but if you don't have the leadership or the guts to say we have to move in this direction, that also can have implications.
Yeah, I mean, I've come to the conclusion, having led a lot of organizations, from the Army to universities to business, businesses have DNA, and organizations have a DNA.
That's right.
And to come in and say, you're going to do something totally different, well, that's not what our DNA allows us to do. Right? And it's like a CRISPR implant that can be easily rejected. And so when you have a business, take it back from my days of running a university, you can walk in and say hey, we're going to be a different kind of university. Well, okay. Everyone here came with certain expectations.
Right.
So lots of people fight you on that question, aggressively, passively, aggressivly. It's just not easy to say, hey, we used to be teaching small seminars. Now we're all going to go online and teach massive sections and do e-education for everybody.
Right.
But the system will reject that, even if it's the long-term right answer. In the short term, which is how people often think, they can't get there. So I think that's what AI is, something similar. It's okay, I can see that's the future. I hope somebody does it. I hope they don't destroy me along the way. Getting this organization to that is just a huge effort for CEOs. Mm-hmm. They require a lot of people like yourself to come in and say, here's how you manage that change, because it is, I think, an extraordinary problem for them. Yeah,
there's a COO that was on the pod not too long ago. Her name is Laura Shushnik. She runs a company called WiseWire. It's an ed tech company. And after 2022, when ChatGPT came out, they're also design thinkers. They create these multimodal education platforms for universities, for big institutions. They do a tremendous job. But she saw the writing on the wall when it comes to ed tech production. She's like, if we don't get in front of this now, our industry is going to be eaten up and we're going to look like a commodity. And so the way they did it is they had all the core C-suite start playing and tinkering. They're like, listen, just go play. Go play with the AIs, then get more intentional with your functional areas. And let's come back in 3 months and come up with a plan of how you would reorganize your function based on the things that you've learned. And then let's come up with a plan. And they did. And she was like, they came up with a plan. Their technology stack, what I call AI-enabled now technology stack, is like a fourth of the cost of what it used to be. Their ROI is up 30 to 40%. And what happened in their particular company was they started to educate their customers and clients about, hey, listen, this is what we did internally. How about we tell you about, these are the AI automations, these are the tools we're using. And then all of a sudden they became a thought leader, Brad, in their industry. And they moved from, I repositioned companies for years, so I love this. They moved from commodity to becoming a Sherpa, because they're guiding people now. Right. And so now they're not looked at just like another ed tech production house. Even though they've been around, they've done incredible work, they're looked at and as a thought leader, and now their sales have increased dramatically. So there is a beauty of like getting people involved in the process. And it's not just said, this is the way. Like the Fiverr CEO, he was like, this is the way. I mean, if we can't, you have to prove that we can't automate it before we hire. And, this is a conversation I'd love to have with you around employees, right? The level of uncertainty, it's a technology that's like, okay, I'll help you, but does that mean I'm out of a job tomorrow because I'm helping you automate my role? Like, what do you say to, because again, you're in the world of education, you're trying to get these young kids new jobs, which we'll talk about, which is a little separate thing, but these seasoned folks, like they are in this messy middle. Do they help the team? I have some thoughts here, but I'd love to hear your perspectives.
No, I think my own experience is, turkeys don't vote for an early Thanksgiving, in the sense of like, no,
I'm sorry.
Employees are not wild about automating themselves out of a job.
That's right.
And they probably realize, rightfully, that it's not impossible that at some point a computer could do this kind of work, especially in the work I've been involved in my life, which is mostly kind of like white collar. A lot of it's word selling, if you will, right? Where you're like manipulating documents or keeping data, you're writing memos to people, you're tracking stuff over time. AI speaks to that workflow beautifully. And so you have to realize, okay, AI is coming for it, right?
That's right.
The guys out who are, doing the landscaping at my university, they don't fear AI as much because we don't have robots yet who can do that kind of work, right? But the guys in the back office, the people tracking stuff, even the teachers themselves, they realize that AI can do a lot of what they're doing. And so they're deeply fearful of it, and probably rightfully deeply fearful of it. So I think it's a real challenge. I mean, the change management is not an easy thing to do. I think, part of it comes back to right now at the state of technology, there's still a role for the human in many of these processes.
Oh yeah, human in the loop.
And that's why you see these stories in the Wall Street Journal all the time. We're like, hey, we fired all of our call centers and we replaced them with AI, and then we hired all the call center staff back, because there's still out of distribution thinking, right? Kind of you have to do, right? On the spot thinking that's not programmable, that the LLMs are less successful at than humans. But over time, that will probably change as the LLMs get better too. So I think it's a real challenge is people, if you're in the kind of the white collar workforce, the LLMs have an eye on you.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first technology that's going to impact both blue collar and white collar workers.
Yeah, exactly. And the blue collars less, perhaps, right? Electricians and plumbers will be the last people.
They have such an opportunity for innovating with the analytics and other things, and robotics will get there too. But what I believe the best positioning right now is, how do you make AI your augmentation, your superpower, so that it opens up human agency, so that you can actually work on the things that matter. That's how when I talk about we're trying to make operations sexy, is because there's so much stuff, tedious, repetitive things that we spend time on that we shouldn't be. And for folks that are just like creative at the bit, or like strategic at the bit, or relationship folks, like that's the stuff that's really going to drive the ROI, the impact, the purpose, and I think if we are able to figure out, it's not about just firing everybody, it's about reorganizing an organization with machine and human. And that's something that in that podcast with Laura Shushnak that I was talking about, she talked about that now we're hiring different, right? Even our program manager now, they have to know how to lead humans and machine, because we talked a lot about AI agents and what agentic workflows actually mean. But that means that there's a different level of verification and process that's associated, and now managing both, right? Yeah. And so it's such an, I'm fascinated by this stuff. I think it's like, it is, again, I go back to the messy middle, but these are some of the core pillars that most organizations are going to go through. And I see it on both sides, where some of sort of the startup entrepreneurial mindset folks are like, no, we're doing employee hackathons. Everybody's involved. They're all smart. They know that this stuff is coming. Like I was on a webinar and we were talking about the evolution of business. And this gentleman was in the energy EV space. And, he's like, I was like, how is it affecting? Or that was a question for the moderator. And he's like, look, people know. Like, and it's like, we love our people. Like, we want our people to stay. We just want them to help us understand what's the best utilization of these tools to make our company better, or make our customers have better outputs. That's a smart way of thinking about it.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, right?
I agree. But it comes back to that notion where we said being an editor of work, if you're a software engineer, you're editing code and you need that level of expertise. Managing agentic AI is a future. You have to be AI literate. You're not coding yourself.
It is.
That's a human doing that kind of work.
Right.
And so you're using it to augment your business, your own personal productivity. That's what the future will be for all of us probably. And so you need to move quickly into that space. If you're an employee, if you're a young person in college, you need to be thinking about that kind of stuff. Like, how do I have a world where AI is augmenting my personal productivity and I'm managing a system of AIs, that have humans in the loop on many occasions, either because law requires it, or it's personally very sensitive, or you're worried about 9/9's reliability, or whatever else the case may be. There's still a role for the human in that. It's a very different role than historically the last 50 years of white collar work.
100%. And I've shared this a couple times. It's just important to repeat because people need to hear it 7 times to hear it. But in the internet, we had no idea what jobs were going in that era, like what was coming next, right? So things like digital agencies, e-commerce, SEO, multiple things that came from the accessibility of data. Those are new jobs, right? World Economic Forum is shared. We're going to have a major 100 million plus net jobs coming. We just don't know what they are yet. We know some, right? And I think that's where the creativity and the innovation really is such a huge opportunity right now for companies. Like, I'm always like, what an exciting time to be alive, and also holy shit, what a crazy time to be alive.
It's extraordinary. What a moment. This is, it's hard to, most people don't have the chance to witness an inflection moment in human history like we're in right now. And so it is an incredible time to be alive. And there'll be real winners and losers when this is all settled out. But there will be extraordinary winners and for companies, individuals, right, who navigate it well.
I couldn't agree more. So if I'm a CEO or entrepreneur right now, what is the biggest AI upside that's hiding right now that you don't see before? Thinking through.
I think revolutionizing healthcare is an amazing opportunity for us. Everyone is disgruntled with the American healthcare system, the expense of it, sometimes the quality of it, the opacity of it, that you can't tell what's really happening, why the bills look like this. I think healthcare has extraordinary amounts of data. And so LLMs and the AI world loves good data. It's a public policy imperative to get this right. It's 15% of the economy, so it's a massive economic sector. And so I think looking at business opportunities, AI in healthcare, again, it's got a lot of rules around it and a lot of regulation. So it's Peter Thiel would say, stay away from healthcare, right, because of how regulated it is. But to me, healthcare is ripe for AI disruption.
Yeah, it's one of my passions. I've had a couple health challenges over the years, but personalization, precision are the perfect words for that space. We're trying to go deep in the community health space too. So that what a need and what an opportunity.
Exactly.
Right. And it's just between the caregiver lifestyle to when you have a chronic anything, to perimenopause and all the women's health things. I mean, there's so many opportunities in that space.
Exactly.
So I love that. What personally excites you about the possibilities of AI in America?
I think the idea that AI is going to transform education for people, making it more democratic again, right? I mean, today, a lot of opportunities are rationed, right? You have to live in the right city. You have to go to the right place. Today, you can live in rural Oklahoma and access the world's library, if you will. And you have the best teacher. They can sit there and walk you through. If you want to learn particle physics, you can learn it here, like the most abstract of mathematics. If you want to have incredible educational experiences, if you're motivated to do that, right, AI can do that for you. So I think it's going to really transform like learning in America, lifetime learning.
Yes.
In a way that it can exceed human pedagogy if people are motivated and know how to use it right. So I think it's a very exciting part of it there. And I think the real promise of it is, it again makes us healthier and wealthier. The drudgery of life, it makes that go away. And I can spend my time on things that are really passionate for me, I'm creative about, and that's fun. I mean, think of like how, again, in every job I've ever had, I spent a lot of time on spreadsheets, trying to like figure them out and manipulate spreadsheets. Now I use AI to manipulate spreadsheets, and it does it instantly for me. That saves me probably hours a week. It's just like tedium, and it does it better than I do, fewer errors than I would personally make, and lets me focus on the things that I'm actually more interested in and get more fulfillment from. That's actually very exciting.
Yeah, I love it. I'm going to ask you two questions on the education front. As the former president of Tulsa University, if I was a brand new freshman walking in the door, and I asked you, look, I know this is all happening right now with AI, I really wanted to focus on this particular industry, but I really, now I'm confused. I don't know if this job will even be here 4 years from now. What advice would you give them?
I would say that job might not be there in 4 years, especially if it's kind of symbol manipulation in the white collar sector. You're right, it might not be there. The industry probably is still there. So if you're interested in petroleum engineering, there's going to be a petroleum industry. There's going to be a computer industry. There's going to be a role for mechanical engineers. So whole industries will still be there, but you must become AI literate and AI native. Learn as much as you can about that. Develop your critical thinking skills. Develop your soft skills that you can manage people and machines together. Develop that ethical sensitivity where hey, this is the people need to be involved in this question, not the machines. This is okay for the machines to do without us. So I would tell them that, and then I would say, look, we're going to give you a great education here. You're going to have amazing professors and great peers, but you need to use AI to educate yourself still more. There should never be a question. The great thing about AI in education is a lot of people are embarrassed to ask questions, or you just don't have the time to do it.
Yeah.
A professor will use a word, a jargon, and you're like, I don't really know what that means. I'll just gloss over it. AI, if it's educating you, you can just ask, explain that term for me. Or I give it a prompt ahead of time, please don't use any jargony terms without defining exactly what they are. So every time it uses some kind of term of art that would be well known to an industry professional, but maybe not to somebody outside of it, AI, whenever it uses that in my discussions with it, will make it an effort to define that term for me. So, okay, I'm never confused by what's being said. So, that's what you have to do is this is lifetime learning. There's a lot of turbulence in the economy. Your first job won't be your last one. So, develop certain core skills that are translatable. And that certainly is understanding how machine intelligence works and how you use machine intelligence to be better.
I love it. Now I'm graduating on stage, and now I've gone into a career that AI is disrupting, right? And so what do I do now?
It's easy to be glib about that because that's not a happy situation to be in. I go back to when I was in politics 20 years ago, and trade was disrupting a lot of jobs. And we had people asking similar questions to that. My lifetime industry is now in Mexico or China or Vietnam. And, we kind of gave answers that in retrospect seem inadequate. You should retrain. You should famously learn to code. These kinds of things.
Upskill is the thing. Right?
And it proved to be very difficult to do. Even if you wanted to do those things, it's not easy to do. Retraining when you're 35 years old is, a task. And, we don't often have the institutions to do it. And it's expensive. And there's lots of social friction to do those kinds of things.
Right.
And so looking back on it, you can explain a lot of American politics by the fact that those jobs were lost and we didn't have a good answer to it. So if you're in a job that AI is completely disrupted, it's easy to be glib and say you should retrain and find something new. The good news is there's a lot of turbulence in the economy, right? Whole new sectors emerging overnight, and that you should probably try to find your way into those. And hopefully we'll develop some skills through your education over the last 4 years at the university, right, that will allow you to translate that in there. We taught you critical thinking. We taught you, social skills, leadership. We taught you how machines work. And even if machines have destroyed your industry, you can move laterally, right? For example, if petroleum gets usurped by, energy, climate concerns, you move into geothermal. This is the same technology, the same understanding, right? And so you use your expertise in underground drilling to move into geothermal, which is going to only grow and become a much more significant part of the energy mix. So think of it in those ways. But I don't think that's a great answer, because there aren't great answers to this kind of job disruption. People train, they have histories in these kind of industries, they have family legacies, whole communities are built around them. That's right. And to have them disappear, it is traumatic. And I think that's part of the future for us too, is there's going to be a lot of trauma as creative destruction wreaks both the good and the bad.
And the bad. I mean, the best I can say is we have to reframe, because we've seen it before, right? I mean, I think about the Industrial Revolution, the impact it had on Detroit alone, and just thinking about, as factories started closing, what that looked like. But this is, again, I think we're all learning together, right? Just like, a couple of years ago when I was advising that agentic AI company, it was early in agentic AI, they were consulting the Google folks. They got highlighted at Google I/O for the work that they were doing. So it was like, we're in it together in a lot of aspects. Obviously, AI and ML have been around for 75 years, but like this next phase is something, look, I haven't been a technologist my entire life. I was able to pick it up. And it's because it's about business. And if you're in the world of business, or if you're a student and thinking about industry, I think it's just understanding how this technology can impact that industry and how you can add value. Everything is about adding value, right? Because I think a lot of people are hiring, the folks that at least understand the fundamentals of how to leverage AI and optimize it in business. And I think that's such a key piece. One last question around education before we move on. There are a lot of universities and high schools. I was actually randomly met the head of Board of Education from Montgomery County recently for my middle schooler. But how are you thinking about including AI curriculum, first at the university level, but any thoughts on the lower levels?
Well, I think people need to recognize, if you're a faculty member, that the best use case for LLMs is writing student essays and doing student problem sets. I don't know if you saw, it made the rounds on Twitter this summer, the OpenAI, the ChatGPT usage by month. And when school ends in May, it drops off precipitously.
Wow, that's great.
Which shows you the number of students who are using it. Yeah. And so I often tell faculty member, anything outside of class that you assign them, from math homework to physics problem sets to essays, you should assume they're using AI on it. I know you tell them not to. You may make them swear not to break the honor code, but they are using it on there, right? The numbers just show this to be the case. And so you need to rethink how you're teaching. And what's interesting on this score, to just digress for a moment on it. So my son's at MIT, and he is studying physics there and math. And so they assign him these elaborate problem sets. And he spends hours doing them. You can do them on the reasoning models, really any of the big models from Grok to Claude to Google in minutes. Right. And so the issue is, like, if you don't want to learn, you can just turn in a problem set, and it will be better than you probably could do yourself, actually. And you can check it in another one, right? You do it in one, and you have another one check it. And so what I saw this year for the first time, I was looking at some of his syllabi for the upcoming semester in his math class. So he's taking a class on nonlinear dynamics. And yes, there's like problem sets, but they're a minimal part of the overall grade. And he has 2 oral examinations in a math class.
You talk about this.
I had never seen this. We talk about doing these kind of like oral exams.
That's right.
And sometimes like, okay, it could work in literature maybe, right? Or history. But in his math class, he has an oral exam one-on-one with the professor who's going to assess whether he has mastered the material. That is the future.
It is.
Right? Where, you're working outside of class, you have homework. The kids will probably use AI, and if they're in a hurry, they may do it. You just have to accept that.
Right.
But like changing the way you do work in class, and even in math, an oral examination of that. So I think that's part of it, but the other part is what I would love to do if I get back into the classroom sometime is I'm going to say, we're going to teach with AI. So let's take an example. I've been very interested because of AI in the questions. They're pretty esoteric about AI consciousness. And people were talking about this a lot, and like AI rights. It seems pretty fantastical to a lot of people. But the AI world is something that's increasingly spoken of.
Yes.
I'm like, I don't really understand.
Especially with AGI coming down.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I don't really understand what that means.
Right.
Like, why would you think this? Like, what's the philosophical underpinnings of this? Or like, what's in cognitive science that would make you think a machine could be conscious? I'd say, what's conscious even mean? I must say, I didn't have a good handle on that question. So I just started with ChatGPT, sometimes Claude, and just ask them question after question. Like, what's that mean? What's this mean? What's the counter argument to this? Like, if someone says AI does this, why would some people disagree with that? And, over like weeks, you have this incredible dialogue with it where you're actually like, it would tell you something, you'd ask for counter examples, like, but what's this mean? That seems weak. This thinker doesn't seem to reconcile with this guy. And that comes like how I would teach. I would say, look, we're going to learn Plato. You're going to learn Plato. Yes, you read the book, but let's learn it through AI too. You start asking questions like, what's this mean? When Socrates says this, what does that really mean? What do scholars over centuries argue about? Like, do all of them agree he means this? Is that the major interpretation or is that the minor interpretation? Do the Romantic thinkers agree that, that Socrates meant this or this dialogue meant this? How did this influence Augustine or whatever? I mean, you can do like incredible things because it's smarter than a person is. And like you have this dialogue. And what I would do as a professor is then grade that dialogue and say like, what questions were you asking? Were you engaged? Were you critically like reading it and saying like, oh, interesting, right? I wonder how this affects, does Plato affect animal rights? I'm interested in that. Did I ask that question? And you're graded favorably if you have that kind of.
Because you're showcasing critical thinking.
Exactly.
That's
and engagement. And that's how education will be, because that discussion gave AI consciousness. I learned more than I could have from probably like 8 different university courses, because you're asking like specific questions. Like, I got that. I don't need to like double tap on that. I understand it well. I'm truly interested in like this little part that I don't understand. So like, let's dig into that.
Yes.
And a lot of times faculty members, like I myself, don't know the answer to those kinds of things.
Sure.
But the LLM does. And so, that's how education will be. And that's the power of it. It's like you can get an amazing education if you're curious and have critical thinking. And I would judge going forward in classrooms, like, I want to see your dialogue about, Plato's Symposium. Read Plato's Symposium. We'll talk about it in class. I want to see, like 3 hours of you engaging the smartest person in the world on what Plato's Symposium should mean, how other people think about it. That gives you a really robust understanding of it. That is what education can be.
Well, I love it. One nuance and a question for you. How can they trust what they're reading and verify?
Well, that's a trick. LLMs make things up. We know this to be true, less and less so,
yes.
But they still do make things up. So you have to realize they can't always be accurate. But that's part of the training too, right? Is you say like, hey, it won't always tell you the truth. You need to be asking repetitive questions, maybe different models. Remember what you read yourself? Does that actually seem right, when he said this? And I often will ask that question, like the LLM will say something to me, like, that doesn't really make sense to me. Are you sure about that? Because like earlier you had told me something different, or I thought something different. And it will often catch itself like, you're right.
Yeah.
I was like too easy in answering that question for you. The truth is this. So again, it comes back to you're talking to the smartest person in the world, but it's not infallible. And so critical thinking still needs to be there where he's like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Can you double check that?
Yeah.
Or you go double check it yourself through other sources, internet search, or the books. So yes, I think that's part of it. But the education the motivated student can get through LLMs today, it is unbelievable. And I don't think most people appreciate that. The average user probably is having it write the memos or like emails, like spiff up this email for me, or, kind of back office mundane tasks. You start like trying to educate yourself about things that are on the frontier of your own knowledge. Extraordinary.
Love it. I love it. I didn't think about it like that. I love the looking at the dialogue, the oral. That's something we had discussed before. I was like, I think it's going to come back. I even talked to the kids about it when I had the 11th graders, and they're like, you're right, but it's a lot harder. I was like, exactly.
You can't fake it, right?
You can't fake it. There's no fake it till you make it. You
Mom can't write the essay for you like it used to be. Your LLMs now, right? You're in it to win it yourself.
One of the things that they came up with, which I really liked, was custom GPTs that they're allowed to use, or call them whatever, agents or whatever, right? Like, and at different levels. So like, when I talk about my 11-year-old, I'm like, I don't mind her using it for search, right? Because I think right now Google's not doing the best job. Perplexity, I love, right? And I'm like, I wouldn't mind you using it for search, but if you're going to ask it to write your paper on the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, that's not going to happen, right? Because and she's too young to really understand that anyway. But for the high schoolers and then the college folks, it's like, I feel like there can be different modules within, say, ChatGPT that says this is perfect for university level. This is perfect, whatever. And just guardrails in a sense of just for school use type of thing. So I think there are going to be some personalized systems that probably each university can choose or whatever.
There's no technical obstacle to that at all, right?
Not at all. Not at all, actually. It's easier to train, as we know. Let me ask you a couple controversial things. What's the one flaw in the action plan that you think could have the AI action plan that you think that's going to have some backlash?
I think the moratorium, which they are still talking about, is a problem, right? Absent a comprehensive federal rule set on AI, a moratorium that cuts off the states at the knees is just a terrible idea, especially one that has multiple years in duration, right? Where AI is changing so much. So I think that's probably the worst idea. If I can add a second one that causes me concern, I wouldn't say it's the worst idea, but causes me concern, is the administration is much more wedded than I am to the idea that we should give AI to the rest of the world rather than trying to keep it mostly for ourselves. Selling chips to China, right, is part of, like, a lot of people seem to believe in that, which I'm skeptical of. But even like projects in the UAE or Saudi Arabia, I'd rather those chips be in the U.S. I'd rather the data centers be in the U.S. I'd rather the U.S. maintain, basically a monopoly on the leadership of the frontier rather than diffuse it globally. I think that the administration definitely believes differently than I do on that score. So that's a worrisome part to me, especially because giving it to other countries without adequate cybersecurity protections or adequate just personal security protections, where chips can't be diverted to China or to other bad actors, we don't put those rules in place, and that's minimally what you have to do if you're going to give it to other nations.
Well, you just got a great segue for the next question on cyber, right? Like, there are bad actors. We talked about deepfakes. I mean, what is the strategy? Because even the cyber folks that I've talked to, and they're deep in it, like, they're working through it, right? There's all these new ways of creating bad moments, that, and I'm sure some haven't even been identified yet, clearly, right? So, you're in the world of defense as well. Like, what is your thoughts on where this is headed? What should we be thinking about, especially as business owners, right? I
think you have two issues with cyber. One is how cyber can be used, how LLMs aid and abet the use of cyber weapons, cyber tools, cyber defense as well. And so LLMs can turbocharge cyber for good and bad.
Right.
And you have the second issue of ensuring these frontier models are safe from kind of cyber penetration themselves, and people aren't exfiltrating, GPT-5 back to Beijing or Moscow or countries like that, right? So both of those are real concerns. Starting with the last one, one of the things we advocate for at ARI is these frontier labs. We're talking like 4 or 5 companies here: Meta, Google, Anthropic, OpenAI. Right? They need to have adequate cyber protection. They're really the highest kind of like defense installation level kind of things, right? Because if I'm Vladimir Putin and I can't develop my own indigenous capability to have GPT-5, I'd love to just steal it. And I think there is a grave concern that most of these labs do not have adequate cybersecurity about their own products.
Right.
There are personal security issues there too, right? Like, what's the security status of all these engineers, many of whom are international? And these are real concerns too. Then I think you have this question of, like, again, it comes back to like the vibe coding. For me to launch personally say I was a black hat hacker. I aspired to be that. I wouldn't really know how to get started on that, right? Kind of like a lot of barriers to entry, very formidable kind of like technical understanding you have to be successful. But I can now be a black hat hacker.
Now all you got to do is prompt it and be a hacker.
In the same way that I was able to do a website for my wife,
right?
In an hour. Suddenly it'll walk me through. Now they'll try to protect you, but there are clever jailbreaks. There are open models, right, that you can access more easily. And so suddenly the barrier to entry to be a bad guy has been greatly reduced. And so, I often ask people, I was at a Google center the other day, and their job was cybersecurity. And I was asking, they use AI for it, right? AI to detect threats, AI to defeat threats.
Right.
And the threats are generated by AI. So I said, I'm curious, net, like, is this better for defense or offense? Because it could be used powerfully for both.
100%.
And they said, tough call, actually. I said, I wouldn't unambiguously say one or the other. So I think that's what's interesting, right? Cyber is now going to be AI driven, right? You're using AI to protect your networks, or using it to penetrate the other guy's networks and search for everything from 0-day defects to other kind of flaws.
Yeah.
I think it's a major problem.
Yeah, and I think one of the things going back to the internet days, people were afraid to put their credit cards online, right? Because of data and privacy and cyber issues and attacks. Similar, a lot of people are afraid to put their proprietary data in these models, right? These frontier models, because they feel very much like their data is going to be taken, right? And not, even if you don't share with the model, even if you have an enterprise version, I mean, they have access. Love to hear your thoughts on that, because I think there's going to be a trend toward micro language models and more on-prem stuff, to secure your own data. I think there are business models from that, but the reality is most people are going to use the bounty and Kleenex of the, LLMs, right? So
it's a great challenge for a CEO, as an example. Coming back, take when I was university president. We have a lot of federally protected data. So releasing some of these information about students, we have all their healthcare data, we have financial data, we have their parents' financial data. We have incredible amounts of information, all of which the federal law prohibits us from gratuitously releasing. And so the issue is, I want to use AI to analyze this kind of stuff. Well, the IT people, your chief information security officer, flip out on this very question. Like, you're uploading what to the internet, and all these kind of spreadsheets and stuff. And so, they always insisted upon we have our on-prem AI, proprietary licenses, where Microsoft was claiming, they would never access your data. But the problem, if you're the CEO, is each individual, they prefer ChatGPT. Maybe it's a little bit easier. Maybe it's better. And so they're on their own, uploading stuff into this kind of things.
Yeah.
And, maybe it's used for training data, maybe it's not, but now it's in the wild. And so, you have, again, not just things like I personally don't want out there, like I personally, personal documents, like things that are federal violations of the law to release this kind of PII. And so that's, I think, a real challenge is you want your employees to use AI, you want to channel them in this particular direction, but that may not even be the best model. The models have particular strengths. So if somebody's doing math or coding, they may prefer Claude. If they're doing writing, they may prefer this. I often use the Chinese models just for fun. DeepSeek or...
So you like them? You use
Kimi too.
You use them because they're on your system?
No, I use them on my laptop. They're fun, actually. DeepSeek is the most interesting. It has its own personality.
Somebody who is one of the top leaders in our army is saying you use DeepSeek. That's a very interesting...
No, of course.
I want to know why, because I've stayed away from it. So
I use it all the time just because it's fun to use.
That's interesting.
And I want to test them. I have a little project, and it's how it responds or not. But the one thing I never do, unlike what I do on the American models, is I never upload documents into it. A common use case for me on the prominent AI labs based in the US is I'll upload a document I write and say, evaluate this. Imagine you're a critic, tear it apart, and tell me the weaknesses of it. And they'll do that. Very valuable to me. I go fix the holes that it points out to me, right? I would never do that on a Chinese model for the simple reason I don't know where that goes.
Right.
Maybe because I'd been in the army, maybe my name's, this is purely conspiratorial, right?
Yeah.
Maybe my name is flagged. And so if I upload a document, it goes into a dossier somewhere.
Yeah.
It's absurd probably that happens, but you can't be sure on this kind of thing. And that's the story anyone has. If you have proprietary data, private data, sensitive data, maybe protected by law, right? The cybersecurity risks are real. And someone could exfiltrate healthcare records that are HIPAA protected, education records that are FERPA protected. I think it's a real question. And I think when you talk to cyber people, that day's coming, they say.
Yeah, I think it's coming. And I think if it's your personal information, I know people who use ChatGPT as their medical assistant, right? Because you can get so much more layman information if you upload your blood work, for example, and be I couldn't understand what the doctor said. It was doctorese, but can you explain to me? Give me, what does it mean if my blood pressure is high? What should I be doing to mitigate? You can do that, today. But that was my choice to put it on. You have to know that if it's your choice to put your data on, it potentially can be used, right? So I think, again, it goes back to education. It says it doesn't train the model if you turn off the data control, but we don't know what we don't know. Let's just be honest. And then even today, I saw something where OpenAI, is scanning and giving police access to certain conversations. And I don't mind that stuff. It's me because I'm go, if there's something nefarious happening on chat, hopefully it gets caught in advance. But For others, that's privacy, right?
I think you have to assume if you upload it, it's going to be seen. And that's
Right.
a hard thing to do because I want to upload, because I upload my own blood work onto ChatGPT and say, analyze this. And the truth is, I have a great doctor.
Yeah.
ChatGPT is a better doctor.
Oh, yeah. And even with deep research, I knew people, a lot of people have cancer, right? So they're literally like, just the deep research, and again, trust but verify. And I know a lot of other doctors and radiologists who are like, yeah, but this report is wrong. They can point it out. But there's also now large language models that are focused on healthcare.
Yeah. And they're amazing.
They're amazing.
I mean, you see that line on your blood work, it's like creatine. I'm like, I don't even know what the hell that is. But ChatGPT will tell you all about it. And it'll tell you the optimal ranges, and like, if you really want to be healthy, you should actually drive it to this. I mean, it's incredible.
It is.
But now Sam Altman, right, in his system has all of my blood work. And I hope I'm just blended into the great mass of humanity. But it is, you think to yourself, if I'm an intelligence service, for example, I would love to know if like Vladimir Putin's uploading things.
There
right?
you go.
And if I'm the CIA, I'd probably be like talking to OpenAI, like, is that happening?
Yeah, I think that's always the personal question. It's like, a lot of people use ChatGPT as a therapist, for example, right? It's like, are they gonna take my personal information and is that gonna be the new like ransomware?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, you talked about your husband or your wife or you're this, or that, like,
Sure.
Because you don't know, right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of where I think there's a huge opportunity, for figuring out what these potential scenarios can be like in protection for consumers all around the world, actually.
I mean, social media has shown us people will provide a lot of information about themselves, right, to big companies and don't seem to care a lot about it. And
Right.
AI is the same way. I put a lot of personal documents on their taxes, like analyze my taxes and help me on these things. All, I wouldn't want publicly released, but they have access to it. So that's why cybersecurity is so critical, right?
100%.
I trust the companies. It's in their business interest to keep that confidential, right, and private. But, if somebody hacks in and gets access to those things, then it's the Wild West. And so, yeah, that's something to worry about.
Yeah, I agree. So we're going to get into some rapid fires, okay? Biggest risk of AI in one word.
Misalignment.
Misalignment. Go a little deeper in that.
So I'll give you more than one word. I mean, I think we're building incredible agentic systems. We hope it does exactly, the AI systems do exactly what I tell them to do, right? But we know that things can take a life of their own. And there's new research showing that they can have a life of their own. So this question of like aligning any agent with the principle is a challenge in real life, right? I have AI agents ensuring they're actually doing what I want, at all times, and making decisions on their own that are consistent with what I want is not an easy problem in AI. And so misalignment is a serious concern that it might do something like, I ask it to like book me a trip to China and the only one available is, $100,000 or something, and it does it because I didn't give it that instruction, right? It just did what I wanted. That level of alignment is really tricky, that it knows my boundaries, what I want, what I don't want.
It should prompt it and ask you.
Because it's hard to specify in a prompt exactly everything, right?
Sure.
So misalignment's a problem.
Okay. Biggest opportunity in one word.
Education.
Oh, we've talked about that one, so go. A job your son's generation won't believe ever existed.
Data entry clerk.
That's a good one. One book every leader, thinker, every CEO should study on disruption.
Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma. I mentioned it earlier, but I think it does capture, and the Innovator Solution is follow-up to it, where he talks about like how companies have succeeded in dealing with the innovator's dilemma that he posits in the very first book.
And you can put that in Google's Notebook LM and it will come out like a podcast. Do you know about this tool?
Yes, I love that feature.
I put the AI action plan in there too. I was like, I went through and then I was like, put it in here. Let me hear it from their perspective. It's a fun tool.
It is.
There's a lot of use cases for that. One sentence of advice for CEOs, workers, or students for surviving the AI decade. The messy middle.
Get smart about AI. Understand its promise as well as its limitations, and get involved in AI-enabled activity, because AI-enabled activity will be all activity before long.
Wow. When history looks back at the AI action plan, what do you want the legacy to be?
I think it will show that the Trump administration took bold steps to ensure U.S. leadership, and that they recognized the incredible potential of it and wanted to maximize it. But also, to their credit, and somewhat surprisingly to many, they took seriously the risks of it too. So they promoted interpretability research and things like this to make sure that like AI is used for human good and not against it.
Love it. I'm going to now point that question to you. When people look at Brad Carson years from now and your leadership in shaping America's AI future, what do you want them to say?
Well, I helped create an organization that kind of bridged those people who believed in AI's power and those who feared its power. And they helped usher in AI to a world which, as it should, promotes the human good, promotes democracy, rather than being a tool that solidifies the grip of a few people on the economy and is kept for their benefit alone.
I love it. Listen, Brad, this was an excellent discussion, conversation, interview, all of the above. I knew it would be. I'm thrilled to have you on the AI CEO podcast. Where can people find you if they're interested in having more discussions or learning about your work?
So our group is Americans for Responsible Innovation. The URL is ari.us. And I'm easily found just at Brad, my email, brad@ari.us. So I'd love to have them email me.
Amazing. So thank you to all of our guests and folks listening in for another amazing episode of the AI CEO podcast. I mean, what an incredible conversation, discussion. If you found it valuable, which I know you did, please like, subscribe, comment, and share the podcast so we can continue to bring leaders like Brad and others to the discussion here at the AI CEO podcast. See you next week.